Chapter 1. The guy on the screen here is a man named Adam Smith. He is sort of the founder of modern economics. He published a very famous book called The Wealth of Nations in 1776. And his book is in the same lineage as the Declaration of Independence, which is the same year. It's the same philosophical foundation, which is a foundation of personal freedom, the individual right, the idea that the king's power comes from the citizens. The king doesn't grant rights to the citizens. It's, sort of the other way around. Adam Smith is still widely quoted in the modern world, still revered by many people in the modern world, because he developed this theory that says government should be involved in the economy as little as possible. Before Adam Smith, the general economic philosophy was government was required to be involved in the economy to make it work correctly. Adam Smith says just the opposite, that markets are the right answer, that a free market with individual rights and lots of competition is the best way to run an economic system. The economic system that's built on markets is normally called capitalism. It's just sometimes called the price system or market economy, but capitalism. Capitalism's fundamental characteristics: number one, private ownership of the capital. It's actually Karl Marx that names capitalism, and it's because private ownership of businesses. In capitalism, you have private ownership of business. The business person, the entrepreneur, we'll talk about this more next chapter actually, but this person is an entrepreneur. They take a risk. They have an idea and they take a risk. And capitalism rewards them for that risk taking through the fact that they own the capital in the system, or they own the business. So you build a hotel on the Strip. You're taking a risk that that property may or may not succeed. You put your money in. The only way you're going to do that is if there's some return, some decent return on your money. Private ownership. The questions. Remember the three questions. What to produce, how to produce. What to produce, how to produce, who gets it. In capitalism, markets answer those questions. The free market answers the questions of what to produce, how to produce, who gets the reward, and the signals that make that work are prices. And then finally, capitalism is about self-interest. You're supposed to do what's best for you. You're supposed to look at all the options for your business and do the thing that's best for your business. If you're a worker, you're supposed to look at the options for you as a worker and do what's best for you. And in Adam Smith's world, in Adam Smith's view of the world, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing for society. Remember, if you're a restaurateur, for your own self-interest, you're going to offer good food, good prices, good service, so you can attract and keep customers. That's good for society. If you're a worker, your own self-interest is to work hard and be efficient, and you should get paid better when you work hard and you're efficient. That's good for you, and it's also good for society. Adam Smith calls this the invisible hand, that there's this invisible hand in the system that says if we work hard for our own interest, we'll end up doing right by the whole of society. The guy in this picture is Karl Marx. Karl Marx wrote, 80, 90 years after Adam Smith. He was living through the early stages of transformation of the economies of the world from being pre-capitalism, mostly agricultural and all that, to having lots of factories and workers. What Karl Marx said is essentially that the world is a history of conflict between classes. That you always have a group of people who's on top, and you have another group of people who are being exploited, basically, by those folks who are on top. And in capitalism, the capitalists are on top, and the workers are exploited by them. In Marx's world, capitalism takes workers and just makes them part of the machine. Most economists don't really buy into his theory, but there's a lot of cool phraseology there. And the idea that workers don't benefit fully from the system, that idea obviously is around in a whole bunch of theories these days. But in his view, workers should have work that's meaningful to them, that lets them take pride in their work and feel good about what they're doing and be part of the system. And instead, the system is exploiting them. The rich are getting richer, the workers are getting poorer, and eventually it will end in conflict. How does the Marxist system work? It's called scientific socialism. There are other kinds of socialism. There's the whole what's communism and socialism thing, and that's not our job to talk about all that. But essentially, instead of a few people owning everything, you have collective ownership. The workers own the means of production. Everybody owns it, which has played out in the modern world to mean the government owns it. Right? The questions, the three economic questions, what and where and how, and those of them, there are questions. They're supposed to be answered by the government using science. They're supposed to be able to apply scientific principles to figure out what's the best way to produce this and what do we need here and what are these, and scientific principles to make things work the best. It's never worked out that way in the real world, that somehow science saved them. And you are supposed to do what's best for society. So the Marxian phrase is from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Even Karl Marx, in Capital, says that human nature has to fundamentally change for this to work. That people want to be rewarded. They need incentives. All of the things that traditional economics says, and for this kind of society to work, we need to change the way human beings work. What we have in the real world are things called mixed economies. There was an attempt for 50, 60 years to build Marxist societies, countries like the Soviet Union, which is now Russia, China, Cuba. These countries tried. It was, I think everyone agrees, wholly unsuccessful. On the other hand, the capitalist countries of the world, the United States, Canada, Japan, all the really successful capitalist countries, Germany, France, England, Australia, they all have moved to a world of less capitalism and little more socialism. So the socialist countries, the ones that tried to be all socialist, have moved toward more capitalism, and the ones that were capitalism have moved toward more socialism. The United States is about 2/3 private sector and 1/3 government sector. That is kind of on the low end for the developed world. We call these mixed economic systems, mixed capitalism or mixed economics, where we try to figure out what the government should do and what the private sector should do, and some balance, some political process, some social process to decide what that answer should be. Part of the battle here, capitalism, socialism, what's the right answer, is built on the questions of efficiency and equity. Efficiency is about how well we're using our resources. Equity is about how fairly we are distributing the rewards. And there's some sense in which those two things are a trade-off. If I tell all the workers that you're going to get equal pay no matter what, then many of those workers are going to choose not to work hard, not to be effective in their jobs, because why? All right, so if you've ever been to DMV, you know that there are people there who work hard and care and everything else, but if it's break time, they're gone, right? Many of them. You see that system is not as efficient, it's not as well handled as it would be if it was the private sector, and people who weren't working hard would lose out, and people who were really efficient at their jobs would improve, and the whole system would be designed to try to serve the customer better than the system is designed to serve. At the same time, if the pay and everything else in the world becomes too uneven, then people at the bottom start to believe that they can't make it to the top. Marx said that revolutions happen, and were going to happen in countries like Germany and England first, not in Russia. And in fact, revolutions happen in countries where the bottom part can't see any way to better their condition. If you can come to the United States, be, Andrew Carnegie, his family comes here, they're just stone broke, and when he dies, he's maybe the richest person on earth, or at least the richest person in the United States. As long as that's possible, no one's going to lead a revolution in your country. When that stops being possible, when the people at the bottom believe that improving their way is impossible within the system, that's when you get revolutions. So this question of efficiency and equity, we need some inequity to create efficiency, but too much inequity is probably a bad thing. Are we willing to sacrifice some efficiency? This is one of the great questions of life. Efficiency versus equity. Efficiency itself can be broken down into two parts. One is what's called allocative efficiency. That's if we're allocating our resources effectively, and if we are able to match the preferences of society up to the outcomes. If what we want, what society wants, matches what's done, that's allocative efficiency. Productive efficiency is producing at the lowest possible cost. So those two things between them are our efficiency goals as a society. Okay? We want to make sure that we're producing what consumers, businesses, government, what everybody wants, and we're producing it at the lowest possible cost. There's a much bigger debate about equity, because what does it mean? Does it mean that everyone should get equal pay regardless of what you do? Does it mean you should get equal pay for equal work? And if we get equal pay for equal work, how different can the pay of different people whose work is different be? Should there be a living wage? Should there be an amount that you have to make if you're working? This is the minimum amount that you get? These are huge debates, and there's books and books and books and books and books and books written on all sides of this. People, well, we're economists, we don't agree on anything anyhow, but the sense that two equally placed individuals should get paid equivalently is a place to start, but that doesn't still answer any of the questions about the range of which that inequality can be expressed. This is just one of those questions economists acknowledge is out there, and very few economists try to dive into, because it's hard. What does equity mean? Is there a definition of equity that we can all agree on? And then if we do, what's the trade-off between that and efficiency? All good questions. If you become an econ major and answer those, Nobel Prize. Science. Economists want to be scientists. There was a time when economists imagined that someday they'd be like physicists and chemists. Instead, we seem to be moving more to actually believing that we're a social science and believing that sociology and psychology and all those other disciplines aren't just hooey, but they have something useful to say. And some of that stuff is hooey, but you know what I mean. So the key to science, the key to being a science, if you want to be a science, is you have to be able to come up with testable hypotheses. And you have to test them, and then you have to accept the outcome of those tests. So Albert Einstein said, time moves differently in outer space where there's no gravity than it does on the Earth. And people went, poo, time. Well, it does. And because of that, we have GPS. That's a testable hypothesis. Right? What we want is for economics to be able to generate those kind of testable hypotheses that let us confirm, or you don't actually confirm anything in science, but support or refute the hypothesis you're testing. We do science through something called the scientific method, which means we observe something in the real world. We make a hypothesis about why it is that way. We have some kind of test or experiment to either prove or refute that hypothesis and draw a conclusion. And let me say that scientists don't believe you ever prove something. Scientists believe you can disprove theories, but you never actually prove them. So despite the fact that every prediction that Einstein made that we've been able to test to date has been proved correct, that doesn't mean his theory has been proved correct. It just means within the bounds of what we know, we haven't been able to refute that theory, but that doesn't mean we proved it. Okay? So, we might observe in the real world that every time a country goes off and prints a whole bunch of money, prices seem to go up. That's our observation. We can state a hypothesis about that, which is called the quantity theory of money. We can test that and see if we can prove it, and then we draw conclusions. The problem is, for economists, that we have trouble with the test and experiment part. We don't want to try to cause huge inflation in a country for no reason other than to test our hypothesis. So we do other things to try to do our testing, and sometimes it makes our results a little suspect. We either have to use statistics, or we get a bunch of undergrads in a room and we try a experiment that we hope mimics what would happen in the real world, those sorts of things, and there's some chance they are inaccurate. Economists refer to representations of our theories as models. And the reason that you do that is a model is a simplification. If you're a guy like me, or maybe not, I don't know. But when I was a kid, I had two kinds of airplane models. I didn't actually have an airplane. My parents would not get me a 747 of my very own. So I had a model, an actual plastic thing that I put all together and painted and did all this stuff, and it really, really looked like a 747. At least I thought it really looked like a 747. On the other hand, I had these balsa wood things where you got two pieces of wood, and they're each about a millionth of an inch thick, and you stick one piece through the other, and you put a little weight on and this is an airplane. So one of those two things looks like an airplane, but if you try to make it fly, it just breaks and then your mom is mad at you. The balsa wood thing does not look like an airplane. If you got out to McCarran and they wanted you to get on a plane that was built out of balsa wood and had a propeller with a rubber band in front of it, you would not get on it. Right? That balsa wood plane does not look, it's not anywhere near as complicated as a real plane. It's about as simple a version of a plane as you can get. And yet, between the model that looks real and the one that doesn't, the one that flies better is the one that doesn't. There are remote-controlled model airplanes that really look like the real thing and act like the real thing, but they're way expensive and way complicated. And we prefer, if we have a choice of something that's way expensive and way complicated, and this little simple thing that works, we're going to use the little simple thing that works. So here's economics. One, we always have to make assumptions. We can't include the whole world. The world is too complex. So we're going to assume some things away, and if we do a bad job of that, we're going to assume away the answer to the problem, and that's not a good thing. So we always have to make sure to tell you up front what our assumptions are so that you understand them. We're going to collect data. We're going to do statistics. That's mostly how we're going to try to see if our models work. And we all know that we can question a lot of things about statistics sometimes, and sometimes the researcher can get the result they want. Very famous man once said that if you torture the data long enough, it will confess. The trick here is, again, this whole idea of simplicity versus complexity. We don't care how simple or complex or realistic something is. We care if it makes good predictions. So if we have a model that makes good predictions, then we're happy. The Federal Reserve spends millions of dollars every year working on a model of the economy, and it did a terrible job of predicting what happened in the recession in 2007 and 8 and 9. It just didn't see it, understand it, or deal with it. Okay? Models are good if they make good predictions. Models are bad if they don't make good predictions, regardless of anything else. And that's really the test that economists use is, does this tell us what's going to happen in the real world? And the last couple of quick parts of our world, remember that economics is a social science. We talked about that a second ago. That means we're in a group with psychology and sociology. We're in a science that deals with people, and you know that people are sometimes unpredictable, whimsical, whatever. And there's two terms you'll hear related to how we study things and how we're scientific. One is called positive and one is called normative. Positive means you ask a basic question. You might say, what do we know about poverty? What can we learn about poverty? What are the causes of poverty? What is poverty? Asking questions that just want to learn the truth of something, if such a thing exists. Normative economics means you start out with a value judgment. You start out and say, all right, poverty's bad, what can we do about it? An economist would say it's not good to start out with this idea that poverty is bad. You should try to figure out what the effects of poverty are and study it without any preconceived notions of what it really is. So we always want to be positive. That doesn't mean happy. That means looking at this thing without any preconceived notions of whether it's good or bad or anything else. Just try to figure it out. Okay, the last bit of information here. Economics used to be one field, and it was called political economy, and then it split off into two main branches with a ton of sub-branches, and it makes economics really interesting. At the same time, some of us aren't really sure how useful all these divisions are, but you'd have to take two principles of economics classes. One is called microeconomics. Microeconomics is about consumers and firms and government, about single entities. What does a business do to make money? What does a consumer do to maximize their happiness? The individual. This class is called macroeconomics. So macroeconomics is a study of the whole economy, not why one person has a job or doesn't, but why the employment in the whole country is growing or shrinking and why people are unemployed as a whole, not that individual. So macroeconomics is unemployment, inflation, economic growth, these big picture things. Microeconomics is the little picture things. And then the question is, why we question whether or not maybe this should really be split up, is shouldn't there be a connection between those two parts? Right? And we'll get back to that before the semester's over, a bunch of times.